Now that we've learned about whole, half, and quarter notes and rests, it's time to expand our vocabulary of note values. Today we'll learn about eighth notes, 16th notes, their rests, and how augmentation dots and ties work. But don't worry, we'll review Lesson 1's note and rest values first. Here are the notes we've already studied. And here are their rests. But of course, we need a bigger variety of note and rest lengths to write down accurately the majority of music out there. We've already established the pattern of how note values get smaller and smaller by dividing each note value in half. Whole notes cut in half become half notes, and those cut in half become quarter notes. So what is half of a quarter? An eighth. Here's a single eighth note. And see that little flag on the eighth note? Those can also be joined together with other eighth notes, forming beams. That makes them easier for us to count. Sometimes in vocal music, you will see unbeamed eighth notes if each eighth note is set to its own syllable in a word, but instrumental music won't usually do this. And here's what an eighth rest looks like. What does half of an eighth note equal then? 8 times 2 is, of course, 16. And here's a 16th note. If you look closely, you'll see that there are actually 2 flags. So when we join 16th notes together, you'll see 2 beams connecting them, like this. Of course, since 16ths are half the value of an eighth note, and 2 eighth notes have the same duration as 1 quarter, you can fit 4 16th notes into the same duration as a quarter note. So very often you'll see them beamed into groups of 4. Here is what a 16th rest looks like. Just as we stack the beams to show 16th rather than eighth notes, we stack the rests as well. They almost look like stacked music chairs, don't they? Now let's see how 8th and 16th notes behave in real music. And here's a variation on it, showing how eighth notes can bring new life to the rhythm. And here are variations with both eighths and 16ths. Of course, not all music falls neatly into note values like half, quarter, eighth, and 16th. Sometimes we need note lengths that fall in between these lengths, or sometimes we need notes that are longer than anything we've talked about so far. That's where dots and ties come in handy. Here's what we call an augmentation dot on a half note. An augmentation dot adds 1/2 of whatever value the note would have normally. So, if the half note gets 2 beats, a dotted half note would get 2 plus half of 2, which is of course 1. 2 plus 1 is 3, and the dotted half then gets 3 beats. Here's a dotted quarter note. The quarter note gets 1 beat most of the time, so the dotted quarter will get 1 plus 1/2. That's 1.5 beats, or you could think of it as 3/8 notes. You can add dots to any note value you want to get 1.5 times the normal value of that note. Here's a musical example. Another way to add value to a note is with a tie. A tie connects 2 notes and adds their note values together so you hold that note for the sum of their durations. Of course, you don't play the second note of the tied pair then, you just hold it through. Here are some examples of tied notes. This works well when you want to add more than half the value of a note to itself, or when you need to add 2 oddly numbered note values together. Maybe you want to add a dotted half note to a half note, which equals 5 beats, or you need to add 2 note values that cross a musical boundary of some sort, like a bar line, which we'll learn about in our next lesson. Here's an example of a passage with tied notes. Now that we're familiar with a wider assortment of note values, let's test your knowledge a little bit. How many beats does this tied note pair have? Still assuming that we are counting the quarter note as 1 beat. That's 2.5 beats. You can also think of it as 5/8 notes. The dotted quarter lasts for 3/8 notes, and the quarter it's tied to is the length of 2/8 notes, so 3 plus 2 is 5. Converting that to quarter notes, you get 2.5 beats. Now try this one. This one is 3.5 beats. The dotted half note is 3 beats when the quarter note gets the beat, and the eighth note is half a beat. You can also think of it as 7/8 notes. Thanks so much for tuning in for Lesson 2, and see you soon for Lesson 3.